Hello. I'm back in Norway and the backlight is as strong as ever, so I just had to go clean the camera and that helped nothing. Actually, can do this.
Good morning, Frode.
Morning, morning. Oh, that's not right. Oh, trying to get a non-horrific situation here so we can see each other. Oh, you don't want to turn. Hello, Bob.
Hi.
Okay, I'll sit sideways. This backlight is just a bit crazy, but that's the way it is. I'm just back in Norway for a few days. Coming back on Monday evening, so that's why I can't do the Monday call. Bob, did you get to see Vint? So Mark keeps leaving, Bob's blacked out, James having breakfast, and I've got strong backlight. So this will be one of our more colorful sessions.
Well,
Bob, did you get to see Vint?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I'm still.
Bob, did you get to see Vint? Did you get the package?
I did not get to see Vince. I'm supposed to get the package this afternoon.
Okay, very good.
He's leaving it at his son's place.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Is in San Francisco, Bob?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to pick it up.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure that you all have heard, Mark and I now have a new monarch, which is, for me, being Norwegian, surprisingly emotional, but also extremely frightening, considering, just like America, Britain is fracturing politically. We have a new government that is, just look up Jacob Rees-Mogg, insane. And the Queen really was, for somehow, the glue. I can't say it any more than that. I'm sure Mark will have more eloquence, but now that she's gone, it's really scary. I think we're looking at a period that'll almost be like another Brexit, but more internal. Some people will say, oh, Charles will be nonsense. Let's get rid of it all. And then they will have a swipe on that side. And yeah, it's quite frightening and very sad. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I don't know. I think there's a generation for whom public service is not dead. I think the big problem is we've drifted into a world of, jealousy and me first and devil take the hindmost. And we all feel the necessity to pass judgment on others about whom we know little. And amazingly, there are still people who work as civil servants, as public servants, who do so without partiality. And I don't think that's fully dead in this country. I think we've become a lot less resilient due to the me first culture of social media and things, and everyone always wanting to share everything all the time. And it's not probably been for the good. Although I'm not suggesting these things were bad things that they came, but they've had unexpected and bad effects. But I don't think everything will fall apart. I think the main thing is to everyone stop worrying about what might happen and let it happen. You know, the problem of this is why you need some central ground. If everyone decides to be partial and then claim that they're the normality, then the centre cannot hold and it will fall apart. But I don't think we're going that way anytime soon. But it's a very sad time. I mean, you know, one of the things being the service, you actually saw the royal family quite a lot. I mean, I don't mean to sort of necessarily speak to all the time, but you did see them often, and actually, they did do work. They didn't just sit around, as people think, doing nothing all day. So
Mark,
it's been a sad time.
Did I understand you? Did you say, don't worry about what's going to happen, just let it happen?
No, I didn't say no. I think that's putting a spin on it. I didn't mean.
No.
I think there is a problem that there's a lot of doom scrolling going on at the moment and talk about what might happen and assuming the things they least like to happen. And I just don't think those are foregone conclusions. And I don't think we should really be considering it now because it's not germane to the future of text. Otherwise, we just scare ourselves about things that may not come to pass, or worse, we make them more likely to happen because we talk about them.
All right, Mark, what would you like to talk about?
Well, let's talk about what we're here for.
There's four of us. We usually start a bit late. Brandel hasn't been here for a while. He's the one who's actually building a mural in VR. Fabian is doing prototyping. He's not here either. So why do you get pissed off by the fact?
So I have that's in that case I have some relevant stuff to say, which on sort of the stuff we do with the future of text is to boil down what would otherwise be a very long essay. Is that one of the things that's come clear to me is that if we want to do visualizations of images, murals, infographics, call them what you will, that have text in them, and we want the sort of interactions we've been describing, that it's actually very limited because a lot of these things, through no fault of their own, were designed before the possibilities we're looking at now. So if what you have and the only thing you have is a bitmap image, well, the best you can do is cut it up like an image map, keep the bits you want to give the overlays that Fabienne, interestingly, sort of one really interesting thing that came out from our last meeting was that if you want to have an interacting bit with a picture in the VR, you've actually got to have a picture, because I, through just assumption, and incorrect as it turns out, had assumed that in a sense you'd interact with the text or the zone where the text was. But it turns out the reality of that, as technology exists at the moment, is that you actually need to have a little picture that sits atop the main picture. If you're using vector graphics, it's actually not much better, unless you've got the original source document, AI format or similar, Adobe Illustrator or similar. Again, you're not well placed, because I made a number of attempts with PDFs turned into SVG. So for instance, SVG mangles all the text. So when the picture you get looks all wrong and the text all higgledy-piggledy. So trying to create what one might loosely call an image map as an afterthought is fraught with problems. So going forward, two things you need is if you want to do this sort of thing, you want to consider it at the build stage. And that also means that the mainstream tools for this could do with getting more savvy about this sooner. The bit I haven't bottomed out yet is quite how SVG and pixels interrelate in the domain, because even on computer screens now, that sort of desktop thing I'm sitting in front of, I've got 4K scaling going on. We've almost moved away from the concept of pixels as we had in the screen pixels as we had in the 1990s, and there are things like device independent pixels and CSS pixels and things. This becomes important because another legacy, ironically, of print is that if you use something like Designer, it's still tied to a notion of a fixed, physical sized, even if virtual, artboard underneath. And I think that's why, in order to get started, it's asking you how big things are. When in reality, in a vector diagram, well, really, they're all scalable, and the only difference is the difference in size between the elements. But that's not how the constructing application sees it. So it's another quite complex bit of the puzzle I've yet to resolve. The slightly depressing thing is it's all going to be a lot harder, really, than I thought it would be. And certainly in terms of just taking complex existing documents and repurposing them will not be a trivial job. End.
Yeah, that's as I believe you have pointed out, that makes sense. There are many issues here, especially if we choose to have a mural inside a document, because then the system needs to know where on the page it is, which is another part of the riddle. But there is something specific here that I'd like to share with you guys. So you can see this, of course, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of concepts here on the left, just concepts. On the right, to have some software institution stuff, but in general, there are some of the contributors in the middle. I don't have many well done bios yet, but there's a really interesting issue that came up, and that is, we were talked about having a pop-up to choose categories, right? So I have mocked up category, and then for everybody who's a person, I write person, and then we have timeline underneath where that little line means ongoing, as you saw last time. But the reason I'm showing it and clicking around a bit randomly is if I now select person, you can see all of these are connected, even though it's very vague, right? The way this works, this creates lines. Let me find a good example. For instance, here for Cynthia, there is actually a reference to VR in the text, as you can see here. That is why there is a line to VR. That makes sense. But there's a huge problem, and this problem is something we can deal with, but there's another issue coming up. If I click on VR, you see these things point to, all these things point to VR. But if I click on AR, almost everything does. Because words like R, words that have A and R in them. And this is where it gets interesting, because if I'm talking about somebody being an author, that shouldn't necessarily go to the author software, right? Even though for me, author and author software is basically the same. For most people, obviously, it isn't. So that means in the text, like here, I'm talking about Jacob Hazelgrove. I'll say, no, that goes the other way. I use the author software rather than just author. What I'm trying to say here is, if it points to just one word, it can often go wrong just because words are used in many different contexts. So that's why I did author software, reader software. Don't need it with constructive labs and soft space. And that is why we have person, category : person. It is the same as this, exactly the same. So it's not trying to hit just the word person or category. It's trying to hit the combined thing. So my definition of a, I just want to read it. It's really simple. Make sure I don't waste your time by making a mistake. So in this sense, I think a category is something you may want to choose to hide or make prominent. For instance, category person, we may want to choose to hide everything that isn't a person. Or we may choose to only look at persons. But when it comes to these other things, how they connect, I think is more organic. Any thoughts?
One thing that jumps out at me is that
Oh,
given the
hello.
category,
Didn't see you
hello.
on there. Hi, hi.
Hey, one thing that jumps out at me is that, so Sam Brocker here, or Brooker, sorry, I can't see if there's a C.
Brooker, yeah.
Brooker is an entity and has a relationship, and as such, it makes sense for there to be lines going from Brooker to electronic literature and spatial computing. Categories don't, they represent sort of semantic links, but because person's not an entity per se, then the position of where person happens to exist and sort of giving, like putting lines from it to other things isn't as meaningful. And so that something is a person is more important than having a line from person to that thing, if that makes sense.
Yes. I mean, I'm faking it now.
Yeah. Okay, great.
No, so this is not useful at all. That is exactly my point. Completely agree with you. It would be more useful if person was in some kind of a button thing we can toggle if it shows persons or not.
Yeah, and it has the ability to augment in some sense all of the entities that are present as person, rather than creating any kind of line information or pollution. So yeah. I think another thing, you're saying about the tightness of the keyword coverage around AR, and that when you have a sort of naively created keyword like AR, then a whole word sort of word fragment matches are going to really overact because they'll connect to everything. So Bob, you actually mentioned this in understanding hypertext, and just the sort of the specificity of linkages, and that nothing beats hand-authored indices and references, but it makes me wonder if it's the sort of thing that for a graph view, having tunable parameters related to how tight you want to make it is a possibility, so that you can have things that are opportunistically generated as a consequence of guesses, but either directly or by inference, you can say, well, no, that's not super relevant, and start pruning them by essentially sort of turning up that specificity. So you have word fragment and in-word fragment matches, if there's an AR in the middle of a word, then that can trigger or not. And then you have the greater specificity of whole word matches, where you need to make sure that there's a non-letter character on either side of that AR, so that it would only match against where there is that thing as AR. And then you have something more explicit still, where there are links that have to be made, and that potentially it increases the complexity of a system to be able to generate those maps. But yeah, having that tunable range may mean that you have the ability to retain value of that, even when you have very, very frequent things. I mean, the other option is to make it so that AR as a category here is something that is sufficiently unambiguous that you don't use AR in that way, and you have category AR, or if you have technology AR, such that nobody can accidentally make it, but you lose some of the magic of it.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, by the way, I do think that this is highly relevant also to murals, even though this is very loosely editorialized, because of exactly what you said. The more you spend time adding categories or different explicit links, it's just going to explode. For instance, here, I've chosen in sentences to say where people are at or where they come from, right? And that can be interesting if you want to see clusters of some people. But I haven't actually defined Norway, USA, or Australia, which is why they're italic. That's why there's no incoming thing. They don't have a definition. If I now define, just do a silly one like place, then we'll see a few things coming into them. But the constraint probably should be the reality of how we want to navigate this. So in this case with the book, we probably, once these things are filled in well, like Bob, you have nothing yet, because I want to make sure you get exactly what you, sorry, that was Bob Stein, but Bob Horn, same with you. Very little here, I just have a placeholder. You know, there should be a lot of lines coming up, and I need to ask you, you know, are you interested in AR and VR? Do you want me to put that in there or not? Because not all of these things come from people's bios. Like Cynthia's bio is really quite long, but it's got just one thing coming out of it that's useful. So that's the whole thing with the categories, because we have institutions, software.
It exactly, you know, I listened to the language, and you just said one line coming out from Cynthia is useful, and of course that strips a whole lot of context out of what the word is and the word useful mean.
What I'm talking about is, why would anyone ever look at this? They would probably look at it.
That's right.
And I expect that hopefully, if we fill this in well with everybody's bios and properly keyword or whatever, hopefully, Bob, you will want to put this into a designed mural situation. Hopefully, maybe also we will have it in a VR situation, because look, I'm running out of space. You know, this is ridiculous, but the really interesting thing that I want is for someone to click on a person here. And okay, so for instance here.
Well, you want to do something that you cannot do now, is that right?
Yeah, what I want them to do.
What is it you want to do?
I'm trying to say that, Bob.
Okay.
If someone clicks on a name like my name, because obviously it's easy for me to edit myself, they should be able to see all these different things here, right? So now they can see that I have some sort of relationship with Ted Nelson. Well, what's that? Oh, I was influenced by Ted, right? So hopefully people who work together, we can follow these lines and people can see what's going on. So it's just to discover relationships, who's working on what, where the clusters are, and that kind of stuff, right? Does that seem like a reasonable use for this? I would love to hear other perspectives. I know there's some hands up, but I can't see it in this view, I'm afraid. I think the first one was Peter.
Yeah, this reminds me, as far as the categories, also of synsets and word senses in WordNet. And from a user interface perspective, in my dream system, I'd be able to do a control click on a word and then get a little pop-up menu to select which word sense I intend that word to be in, so that I could have author, and I'd left click on author, and then I'd get the program and creator of books. And then I could select at that point creator of books or the program, and that would then annotate the author with which synset for the word author I intended to be using, either synset 1 for the program or synset 2 for the academic function. So then you could have, you know, author /1 or author /2 to indicate which sense of author you were intending to use.
I think that makes sense for a general space, but this is a glossary, meaning that it's intended for one very specific use. You know, this is really.
I was saying in more general terms, so.
Yeah, okay.
Totally agree.
Okay, so.
Oh, and thanks so much for telling me that little shortcut click to get the reader display mode that I needed. Solved the problem perfectly.
I'm glad that worked for you. Thanks. Was there one more hand? I think there was 2 notifications.
Oh, let me lower mine.
Me, if I may, unless there's anyone else who wants to jump in first. Just thinking back and to your, this is a response to your, comment on what you were showing. The first is that I picked up on your fact that, categories is something we might want to filter on, and that's sort of interesting, because in a sense that is one way to think of them. So another way is, therefore, if you are the writer, the creator of this thing, if you want to filter it, you're going to need to have a category or something else like it. I think we're what we're seeing is the problem of I can't remember, I don't know what the correct term for it is, but it's where we want to write in natural language and have the computer just guess what we want. And you know, we've seen how well things like AppleScript went in terms of declarative programming, and we've seen how AI is making some inroads, but not as fast as we thought with actually guessing our meaning. So if this is turning out to be difficult, it doesn't surprise me. So, you know, it's not a critique. I mean, in a sense, unfortunately, it reinforces some of the sort of known problems we face. So, and I'm thinking back to the fact that one of the first things I think that got added to wiki syntax was the fact that just having to use the name of the article as the only way you could make a link to something doesn't scale well after a point. And I think that's sort of what you're pointing to with your thing about having author versus author software. Well, I mean, in reality, what you want to do if you're making genuine links rather than have them auto-detected is that you actually want to have a sensible, you know, a considered anchor text, which may or may not be the exact name of the thing you're pointing to. And again, these are problems that arguably the space sort of keeps tripping over. And you see it going round and round in the whole PKM, the personal knowledge management app space. And I'm not sure yet that I've seen any answers, not that there aren't lots of people looking. So in that sense, we're not alone. And this is, and yeah, it also means that, you know, there's nothing wrong in what you're doing, and the problems you've surfaced are not because you're doing something wrong. I mean, I think they are genuine within this space.
Yeah, thank you. So the point that I think has surfaced here is that category is a different thing. Like now selecting any, for instance, what would be useful to interact with of those three things? And it'll be in very different ways, right? When it comes to the category person, it isn't useful ever to see a line from that. It is something that maybe it would be an icon or something, but that seems to be, to me, to be the kind of thing that is universal across the board. It's exactly what you said, Mark. If you're going to filter on it, the system has to know what you mean. So that's why you should be able to do that. Now, clicking on author or cognition, you know, should allow you to do further things, not just see these relationships. Sorry. But I'm just, in order to save time a little bit, there's only 2 bits of metadata in here. One is category, one is timeline. And the timeline, this line is meant to be from dates to, oh, right. So this line here just means it's ongoing, because you would have, if I died last year, it would look like this, right? So if this was put on a timeline, it would have a start point, it would just keep going. That's all we have, but that is useful. So if we consider one view a curated mural, another one seeing relationship like this, another one the timeline, then do you guys agree that in principle it may be useful if all the categories like person, software, institution, etc., might be useful outside, almost like a button? Or do you still think it should be there as a liney thing?
I think anytime you create software, there's a tension between the simplicity and the integrity of the mission the software is for, and the flexibility and extensibility of it, because every feature adds something, but some of the something that it adds is complexity. So it's kind of up to you as to where you sort of put the limit of that. But that said, I do think that things like people badge and color and have the ability to sort of augment individual entries with icons or colors and things like that in a lot of places. And that could be a plausible thing to do to resolve that, where what you're trying to do is identify the attributes of something rather than draw references between them, because person is clearly an attribute rather than something where you need to know about where person is on your map. But like I said, the big question is, does that come close enough to the core of the functionality that you think you're trying to isolate and highlight as being the job of author? And if so, how do you sort of minimize the closure over what it's doing right now and this new thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, let's not get, I'm grateful that we're looking at author specifically, but I am trying to look at the more general things here, of course. And I just saw what Mark wrote in the notes about using, so Bob, here for you, I've just said man, because person we already have. So I'm using you, Bob, as an experiment in those brackets. And, you know, that works well, right? I don't mind having a grammar for this, because it doesn't have to be category colon person. It could be person in that. It could, of course, also be bullet or star person or whatever.
I was actually suggesting something else, and it alluded to your point about, well, if, you know, Cynthia Hayes is connected to Dina Larson, but Dina Larson doesn't show up in the text, that you might basically have a method of annotation that allows you to make that, because otherwise, I mean, this is, I say, it's a known problem. That's broadly where
that side of it. That side of it, I don't have a problem with, because the reason for that is I use periods, right? So if I say, if I just add says knows Bob Horn, right? So I have to remember to, that's all I think we need, because I don't think we need to embed things that are hidden, like a link that you can't see. So I you know, Bob and I have did a little bit
of.
You
know, you would see it. That's the whole point. You would see it.
But why would you want to see it as a special type of link? Why not just make a sentence out of it?
It's not a special type of link. You specifically mentioned the fact that you had some text in somewhere where you thought there ought to be a link, that there wasn't, because effectively because your links are auto-generated on string matches. If the string you need to match to doesn't occur in the description, the link doesn't occur. So this is what we're looking at.
The solution to that is just write it.
What we're looking at here is a wiki. Essentially, you're visualizing a wiki if I reduce it to a pattern. Reduce sounds pejorative. I don't mean it like that, but in other words, all the lines that you're producing here, and you're doing it nicely dynamically, which is really nice. But essentially, when you mouse over or select an object on this map here, you are generating the links wiki style. So author turns up because the word author turns up in the text of the definition of Bob Horn. Yeah. But if that definition didn't occur there and you thought it ought to, you could either write it in, fine, but even then you may not find, because as you were beginning to point to, where you may have several, you might have two John Smiths. The point being that often pure string matching will break down at some point. And we've seen this many times over. So we can either say, I don't worry about that, that's fine. And I'm not going to entertain it, or I'm going to find some workaround, you know, in the way I describe people. So in other words, I mean, there are lots of Mark Andersons. So the first Mark Anderson to play becomes Mark Anderson. I guess the next one becomes 3 or 2 or Junior or whatever, because they can't be that. And so, but this is what's manifest here. And I'm not saying this to make it sound difficult. This crops up all the time. And it's going to be no different here. And the issue also is that if you're writing for yourself, that's fine, because you can sort of do the curation. If you're writing to be used by other people and possibly shared with them, it gets more difficult, because the secret sauce that's going on in here that allows you to remember, oh, I did that special thing.
Mark, we're talking about a slightly different problem. I agree, if you have 2 Sandbrookers, there is a specific problem. I get that. What I'm trying to say is that in a corpus like this, you may very reasonably say, highlight all the people. That is probably something somebody would do, right?
Sure. Yeah.
All I'm saying is, what is the efficient way, without someone going into weird systems of how we might want to do it? What's the easiest way we can make someone annotate that someone is a person? That's all I mean. Because maybe somebody doesn't care about the institution someone is at. Because I could so easily imagine there's a few key things, and most of them don't, like these. these are basically just concepts. They're not institutions, they're not tools, they're not persons, they're not places. In a sense, they're really boring like this. So they're just called concept, they're the default. But I want to be able to hide them and then see them. So I really want to hear from you guys the two things of what are the types of things we want to hide and show, and what are the ways you want to be able to do that. So we all, I think, agree we should do some kind of tagging, but how do we want to do that? And you know, there's so many ways it can be done. What's the most natural and beautiful way we can do it?
I think that would depend on what people want to be using this tool for, what they want to be thinking about, because you can, like, ideally, in an ideal world, something understands what you're doing. And so if you had the ability to make an educated guess about the naminess of a node by loading in the top 50,000 most common human names, then that would help somebody a lot. But it depends on, like how robustly they intend to create that sort of representation.
Well, one thing that's we're really learning from Bob is the importance of human curation and a limited data set, right? So in this case, I have to admit, a dream for me, and I really hope we're on the same wavelength to an extent, is that we work on Bob's 3D mural, which I think is amazing what you're doing there, Brandel. But imagine if the mural or one mural has Cynthia Haynes in it and all of this stuff here. I think it would be really, really useful. And I also think this is not exactly rocket science from my perspective, but who is Cynthia Haynes related to? What fields does she share? You know, she's a person. I don't want to see anything on Bob's mural except for people, but then I want to see a relationship. That kind of balance, I think we can get, because these people who do the taxonomies and ontologies, knowledge graphs, and all of that stuff, there's a lot of genius work there. But I think that often the problem starts happening when it's unbounded. And it goes to more of what the problem both you and Mark were saying. If we have, orange juice and it can mean 20 different things, that's a problem. But our data set is a book, so to speak. And it makes a completely different animal.
Well, Fred, in terms of tagging and inside the context, so in the closed context of the book where you said effectively, you control the vocabulary of things you might want to put in, then I think you can use some very simple loose tagging in the sense that it's a controlled vocabulary, but it's in a sense it's the group's vocabulary. So we don't have to worry too much about whether it meshes with everyone in the world's vocabulary, because we're working there, and that makes it light and easy to apply. In a life beyond that, I think it gets more complicated, but to avoid bringing that complication into the space now, there's no reason that essentially you can't, have a set of tags. It just breaks down if you have too many people applying tags, because it turns out that we're, as humans, remarkably bad at having the same words to describe the same things.
Yeah, absolutely. But in a bounded space like this, it's like the work that you've done going over Bob's murals, where these info boxes have value. It's I would say it's really related to that, because the term is very often Bob's bold text, and then the definition is the full text, roughly speaking, right? So if we take that, all I've done is remove everything and just kept it as bare bones as possible. If we could find a mechanism to take it between these spaces, and it will not be perfect, because layout and color and shape is important in Bob's work, because it has real semantic communication. It doesn't in this work, but if we could somehow connect them, and of course, if we could have a simple mock-up or something like this on the 27th or 28th, I think that would be a real thing.
Yeah, color's an interesting limiter too, and again, an unintentional one, in the sense that if color's extremely useful, but if we do that, we're embracing a constraint, which is saying, well, we probably can't have more than 6 or 8 colored things, because and that's probably doesn't even count for colorblind people who probably can do less. But because the color can produce two things: unintentional noise, which actually makes it harder to read the thing rather than less. It makes it harder rather than easier. And you just run out of colors that are easily discernible. Again, I sound terribly half empty, and I don't mean that at all.
No.
It's just like it's a constraint that if we go down the line and say, okay, well, we'll put color hints in, we need to know that won't scale well.
Colors can scale well for the individual who does it on their own style, but it certainly isn't shareable. But let's go back to the beginning discussion today, which is about our queen who died. One of the things that is in a lot of the media now is the royal succession trees, and they're fascinating and kind of beautiful, and they relate a lot to Ted Nelson's work, of course. And the reason I think they're relevant to this is they are not trying to have every person in the world. It's a limited data set. I think for what Bob is doing and what I'm doing and what the book is doing is limited data set. And I think that frees up some real possibilities for interactions. There's a lot, because if Bob wants to have every person tagged to have a cartoon icon of a person, go ahead. Other people don't have to use the same thing. Small is better. I agree, Peter, absolutely. I'm sure Mark does too. Also, I want to bring up something from Annie's book. So James and Bob, you discussed Annie Murphy-Paul's book the other day, and there's something really interesting in there about the way people work together, where she talks about how when you have a perspective, a point of view, or something you want to get across, an assertion or something you want to happen in the world, your brain power will be focused along making that happen. It will be focused on persuading other people. That is your job, kind of. Of course, you're going to try to be relatively logical and rational and look at your own idea from different sides. But the job of a non-invested person is to find faults. Right? That is basically how communication works. Because someone who has been given this assertion, here you go, can then look at it from the outside, so to speak, and poke holes in it. That is often, it's a basic human thing, and it can be really annoying if you're the one saying the idea. But I'm just wondering if, in the kind of things we're talking about building here, we can build that process into it. Like the mural is an assertion. You know what I mean?
Frodo, I would disagree in that.
But that proves my point.
Well, in that the primary purpose is to find fault. I'm somebody who typically, when somebody says either or, I typically say both and in response, because it seems to me that as a reader, I have multiple purposes, multiple interests. Number one is listening and understanding what the author is saying or trying to say. Number two is kind of listening to my own reactions to it, which are both negative, i.e. finding fault, and positive in terms of finding positive value. And so I think the primary role is multiple functions. And
I agree with you very much. I think we're talking about different things, which is really useful. I was a teacher for a while, which was a highlight of my life. I became teacher of the year, which is another story. And the thing that surprised me is that students listened to me. I remember there was one, to say it politely, American Valley Girl type student. And she was doing that typical Valley Girl, superficial, like nonsense talking. She was complaining about another person. And it wasn't in class, it was at a big group. I went over to her and I talked a little bit to her, and I said, well, why don't you look at it from her perspective? An obvious thing to say, not very genius or anything, but the amazing thing is you could see in her eyes that she thought about what I said. She considered it, and afterwards she changed her behavior. Why did she do that? Because I'm a genius or I'm God? No, because I was a teacher. So in her life, I had a specific role. And I think that teachers are listened to until we fuck it up, right? But there is an authority. You want to learn. So also in a book, you want to learn from the book. Nobody buys a book wanting to disagree with anything. I agree with that aspect of it with reading. But in a conversation, I think our mental energy, even though in this group we're all very open and very supportive, it is something in here with our social brain that it's easier to, when Mark makes an assertion that I think is rubbish, to say that than to see it. But when I say something, I may say the same level of rubbish, but I will excuse myself because I know what's behind it. You see what I mean? So I'm talking about how maybe the energy flows with this, and I'm wondering, with the kind of presentations we have, if we can take note of this kind of dialogue. Yes, James, you were going to say.
Curious if you have a general chapter reference or page reference that you're referring to when you say she's talking about the way people work together.
I think it's the social mind. I don't have the book.
Okay.
I'm in Norway for a few days, but
that makes sense.
Because there is another aspect of this that I'm really wanted to know what you guys think. So a friend of mine, very close friend, she's a self-made business person, not multi-billionaire, but she's done it herself. And she lost a client the other day. She told her mom, she told her family, and they were basically like, yeah, that's business, get on with it. And she was really upset. She needed a bit of recentering and focusing on other things. And I think it's very, very similar, because when something happens to you, it is, of course, very different when it happens to someone else, even if it's someone else you care about a lot. You will look on the upside, you will try to make it right, you will look at the context, you will compare all this stuff we do. So that's what I'm saying. Bob's stuff is curated. He is not pretending to make a knowledge graph that is objective and neutral, which is something I find really annoying, because they are not neutral, obviously. So Bob says it is like this, that's it. There's been a process. I worked for these people. It is like this. How can we, because of the process, how can we, now that it's done, still support the process?
Which process? What do you mean by the process? The process of creating it, or the process of translating it into VR?
So you are listening. No, I'm teasing you, Bob. That was a very good question.
What do you think I'm doing? Reading the chat?
Yeah, exactly. No, what I mean is the process of any recorded communication is probably A, the record in and of itself, and B, all rhetoric is designed to change someone's mind or to reaffirm. It is designed to have an effect. You're not going to read anything that has no wish to influence your mind, right? So you have the process in the beginning where you work with people to make this mural authored piece of work, and then you put it in the world. So I'm talking about the related process where that work now has to convince other people about its correctness, about its honesty, about its cohesion, all kinds of stuff, right? And there will be mistakes. Of course there will. It's a human product. There will always be mistakes, but how can we help that person engage with the work to understand it better for its pros and cons? Can that be done? Can we do the kind of knowledge embedding for that process? A very simple thing, of course.
Well, it isn't. It's not for Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's not. But
well, you started to answer it then, or what?
I was just going to suggest a little thing, but if you have something to say, please go ahead. There was some silence. Please go ahead.
Well, silence is good.
Yes, it is.
Sometimes even 5 minutes of silence is good. And now I've forgotten what the question was. So what?
How can a finished work like a mural, particularly mural, help the person question it, I guess is what it comes down to again. Hi, Alan.
Oh, it helps. There are, of course, limits. And the limits are, among the limits are that you can, that the creator of the mural and the team that he's working with describe what the phenomena they are as clearly as possible. They're doing description insofar as possible. Yes, description can fit under somebody's category of everything is influence. That's all right. I'm all right putting that under that category. But the attempt is to describe a phenomena as clearly as possible and as simply as possible, given the assumed context of most of the viewers. Now, there's a whole bunch of concepts in that reply to you. You know, it will have a different, you know, different people who come up to a mural will have different interests and different backgrounds. And so they will take away quite different things.
Can we reflect on that particular aspect for a few minutes, Bob?
Sure. All right. Mm-hmm.
One thing that Mark and Chris and I talked about many years ago is textbooks that have different levels of descriptions, to put it simply. It seems that that's what you're talking about here too. I think that is really, really valuable. And I'm wondering, what's the feeling of how to do this? Is it a Q&A when you walk up to a mural? Or is it the different data boxes of different stuff behind it? Or what's the feeling in the room of how to even look at this?
Well, it would have to be in part, are you interested in nuclear waste disposal?
Not really. But I'm really interested that someone needs to be an expert on it.
But that's Bob meant that as a general question for the viewer.
I know. I just giving a bit of color to it. Just a bit of color, Bob. Please, please, please. I'm so sorry.
Everybody, what's been happening?
We're talking about, actually, I'll show you real brief. We've been talking about the mural and encodings. You know, here's you. This is generally people in our community. And I'll restate it, actually. Maybe something has changed with us. But if you click on Jaren, of course, you will get a line to VR USA, because that's part of the description. I've also got this thing called a category. So if you click on the category of person, you see, you know, all these people go to that. Category of person is not something that's useful to have visible on the screen to move around like this.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that is useful as a piece of metadata to say show or hide all the persons or institutions or software or general concepts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking a little bit about that. And now we're talking about how when this kind of data is encoded in a mural, it can help the person approaching the mural, and the person will have very different points of view, background, and question, like Bob just said, to interact with it, to learn more.
Yeah, and this is, you know, what Frode has been showing is his idea that one would make a mural out of a bunch of glossary items. Not something I would do.
Right.
I would make the glossary later, maybe to support certain kinds of uses and searches and so forth. So to start with the glossary, with a bunch of glossary terms, is not at all where I would start if I were creating a mural. Since we are talking about analyzing a current mural, that is the nuclear waste mural, then one I would ask is to what degree a glossary would be useful for that, and we would go and look for the glossary items in nuclear waste. So it depends on whether we're starting to create a mural or if we're trying to analyze a current one. And we haven't decided, and nobody has really asked whether we want to do one or the other, and kind of stick with
is the
that.
frame of the conversation about how to do this specific thing, or is it broader as to like what would an ideal interaction style be? Like, is this a talking about a particular project or approach, or kind of like what is possible, or what are we missing?
There are different people in the group, and different people have different views of where they want to take the group to.
Yeah, this started 2 or 3 sessions ago on the question. I believed that Bob had said he'd offered to do a mural of the group's conversations. And then he was concerned why that hasn't been taken up on. I said, great, let's do it. Let's try to do it for the future of text. And then obviously that is a huge undertaking. So so Bob is a little bit leaning towards looking at the nuclear waste mural. I'm leaning towards trying to do something new for our work. But that's fine. I think the conversations feed each other.
What you have not asked, and what I did offer this week to all the people, at least Alan wasn't on the list, since I don't have his email and so forth, was that if we're going to make, if I were going to, and if I am not offering to make any old mural of any old discussion, please, that isn't what I do, and that isn't how murals are created. They start with problems that are really hard for people to deal with. So I offered 3 questions. They haven't been mentioned yet in the first hour of this discussion. So I assume that people that are not interested in it, in doing that kind of thing.
Bob, that's kind of cantankerous of you. First of all, as you said, Alan has to see the question. You're the one who asked the question. You should feel free to say it again in the group then, right? There are many, we have 2 hours. There are many things we can go through, right? But before we go that, before I shut down my screen, just a really brief thing. Bob, on your point about making a type of glossary before or after making a mural, the logic I'm thinking about is that what you see on the screen here is your mural. But
no, it isn't.
No, listen, can I just, it is a mural without the background, so that you can start chunking and start connecting things. It's like you're an illustrator, right? If you want to,
it's all right, and I will say it's your idea of a mural. You can call it a mural if you like.
I'm just saying.
I will disagree.
Okay, Bob, you're the expert, so of course you get to decide. But what I'm trying to communicate,
what it is a graph, or whatever you call you computer people call graphs, directed graphs, which I started to see 15 years ago at a a conference hosted by the CIA, and there were 15 companies making these kind of things that had already struggled with all the issues we're talking about today.
Right. So after the
categories, what is a word? What is a meaning? They reinvented phrases again. What is a phrase? Two or more words together that have some meaning.
Okay. Right. Fine. You don't need to be so combative. What I'm trying to say is that when you're an illustrator, and I know Illustrator very well, not as well as Brandel, but when you're an illustrator, you have different things that you move about. Some of them will visually become a background, some of them will visually become elements, and some of them will be connecting things like arrows and so forth, right? That is what you work with in Illustrator, isn't it?
In one sense, in one way of looking at it, yes.
Right. So all I'm saying is that as Mark has gone through and looked at your murals,
I can't do it now, but I will.
Just when you finish it.
Sorry. As Mark has gone through looking at the metadata in your murals, the small text put it up big. Okay, so your murals don't currently have lines connecting like this example on the screen right here. But what I'm saying is that if you had an environment like Illustrator, where you can attach some metadata to some of the things as you move them around. So when you come across Cynthia, who the heck is that again? Oh, it's there. You know, it's in the object. That might be part of the process. I'm not saying that this in any way has the shape of a mural or anything like that. It doesn't have the background. It doesn't have connective elements. But I'm saying embedding while you're working may be useful. Anyway, could you please tell us those questions?
It may be, and we've spent the last hour talking about a maybe.
Bob, that is what this is. Why are you being so difficult? What are your questions then? I'm sorry if I can't bring in a maybe to a discussion group. What's the point?
Well, I thought you wanted me to make a mural or to do something like that, and your idea is that that we start with a glossary and we spend the first hour on the glossary. No, that isn't what. So that isn't how I go about things. And
Bob, what are the questions you want?
I'd like to interject here if I could real quick, because I think maybe there's an issue going on that's underneath this that it at least is interesting maybe to some of the other people in the group. If not, I can back off. But it's that particular part about glossary first or glossary at the end, which indicates, do I think by putting things together around visually and work it out on a canvas, like I'm sure you do, Bob? Or is it, no. Or do I think by being able to have
that is not what I do. No, it is, you know, you're sure that's what I do, but that isn't what I do. Okay. That isn't anywhere near at the beginning of making a mural. No.
All right. A free form association of ideas that sort of become formal over time is one way to approach figuring out how to connect your thoughts. Another is to say, here are all the entities that are remotely involved in a concept, and I'm just going to put them down, and then an image will accrue. But there's an aspect of moving towards a finished product, or an aspect of, as Freud in his application was showing, that you may be able to come up with thoughts as you're enacting with it, as you're moving things around, right? So one is a flat object, another is an interactive one. Those are aspects that are removed from this particular topic, but are very applicable to the broader conversation that we typically have. So I'm bringing that up to say, like, is that what's at the root of this? Or is this really just like, we got to figure out how to do this mural? Because I'm coming in from obviously not having been here for a few weeks. So I'm just trying to understand where
those are good questions, and we rarely discuss what it is we're actually going to try and do and then stick to it, because it's framed. This is framed as a discussion group, and as in a discussion group, I won't be able to, you know, I'm not interested in making a mural just of general discussion. because many people come to the murals as, oh, this is an artist just making some art. No, the World Business Council of Sustainable Development and their 29 senior strategists from the biggest companies in the world described me as a synthesizer, not as an artist.
Okay,
and it's
great.
a synthesizer of very, very complex material. The future of the world over the next 40 years in all of its different dimensions, from manufacturing to energy, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And so the thinking that we're just going to make a glossary and get started on something, not at all.
So is the to you, is it that there are certain topics that really cannot be adequately expressed unless they are in a visual mural fashion? Or is it that your experience has given you a way to think through the fundamentals of a paradigm and present it, and so it's like it's your way of thinking that is the essential tool?
It's a process. Human beings have difficulty synthesizing very large, complex subjects, like 12,000 years of nuclear waste disposal, which is the one we're talking about today. Its history, its current political and technical problems, and its 12,000-year plan. Now, that's a complex subject matter. Mm-hmm. You have to pull together a bunch of experts who are going to do it, and you have to spend a bunch of time interviewing them, asking them, beginning to create descriptions, outlining who it is that you want to communicate this information to, and so forth. Which is quite different process of I call it synthesis. It's all right with me. Somebody can call it something else. I don't care, but that's what I call it because it comes closest to one of the rare skills in our general society, because we're heavily over analytic. Not that I'm criticizing analysis, important, but I'm only saying something else is missing.
Yeah, agreed.
From it. Yeah. Several times I have in this group said, yeah, I would, there's probably a mural to be made. What's the problem? What are we working with? What is the larger problem issue? And I wrote to the group whose emails I had. I'm sorry, I don't have yours. The following three questions. What are the major problems we are trying to solve by putting text in VR?
Right.
Second question, describe what functions that are important to you that it will be possible to improve by doing them in VR. Mm-hmm. That we can't do by improving 2D writing drawing software. In other words, I'm trying to make a distinction there. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. If we want to talk about how can we just improve things for doing 2D, well, that's a different problem. And you would synthesize it in a different way. Mm-hmm. My third question was, what will we be able to do better in making information murals? What will we be able to do better in making information murals in virtual reality? In other words, why put them in virtual reality at all?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than something else, you know, rather
Yeah.
than gaming, you know, gaming and simulation, very important ways to learn things.
Yeah.
That are quite different than having a malleable but more or less stable synthesis of information that an information mural is. Oh, those are my three questions, and I would have, you know, if they are of interest to the group.
Bob, you did read my email reply.
We would have
right?
to, what?
You did read my reply, right?
No, I didn't get a reply.
Okay. My reply, the first one is, okay, I sent you two replies actually. So, and the replies goes to two things. One, we've had a lot of discussions over this over the last half year. And the introduction to book 3 that I've shared tries to address some of this. But at this point, it's probably better to start testing and feeling rather than theorizing. That was my answer to this. So it was not unanswered. I'm not saying that's the definitive answer, but I'm saying that's at least my answer to you.
The question I have, and I didn't, of course, didn't write it, is that what this, does the group want to address these questions? If not, that's fine with me. I don't have to discuss these questions or synthesize them. Is there some other question? Is there some other question that this group wants to discuss and I'm talking about, I'm saying that while maybe some of the questions are not as serious as nuclear waste disposal, maybe we have actual questions that would be worth making a mural out of, synthesizing a huge mural out of it.
Right.
I don't know.
First of all, the name of this community is on the future of text. It's not about nuclear waste disposal. If you want to do a mural around the questions of the future of text, that would be great. But when it comes to theorizing about what is better in VR, we've spent a lot of time on that. And I know you've been quite not so super happy with the idea of VR, but today you will actually pick up a Quest 2 headset. So instead of just talking about it, you can go in and try it. Okay.
So Frodo, I understand the frustration. I think that the questions are not an indicative of a lack of interest in or a lack of awareness that there have been answers, but more as a vehicle to formalize the discussion such that, because the point Bob makes is that these are the questions that start the process of imagining what a mural might do. And so it's not so much that we don't already know the answers to them, but that these are the focusing questions to begin that actual process, as evidenced by the NIREX murals and other things, is that presumably there were different questions for the NIREX murals, but they existed, and there's a good chance, in fact, that they bear a formal resemblance to these questions as something that allow us to begin that process. And I'm afraid I've been sort of a little bit out of it recently, just because I've been trying to get approval to come to London, and my coworker Ada is actually over from London at the moment, so been able to hang out with her. But I would love to actually try to foreground those questions and think about what we want to do with them. If other people feel like doing that, I've got them up on screen and I can share and we can look at them.
So you might ask, if we agreed that with Brandel that's what we want to do, and we still haven't necessarily agreed on that, then what would we do next? And what I would need to have done next is rough drafts of descriptions of the answers to those questions.
But Bob, my frustration is as follows.
And if that's not what you want to do, that's fine. You know,
my frustration with that, Bob, is as follows. I feel that I've done that many, many times. In the journal that Mark and I have been editing, there are plenty of articles that tries to imagine work in VR. And some people, I know Brandel has actually read it. Most people haven't. I haven't been too pushy. And because there wasn't a reception, Adam Warren left the group because he was tired of hyperbole and people just dreaming. He wanted to only implement, right? So I felt there's been a lot of that. I'm very happy to have a session on that. But what I'm really tired of at this point is trying to sell the idea of work in VR, because at this point we spent half a year on that. So now it's a question of, let's just see what it can be. But if you want to have the discussion
okay, that I'm happy with that. I don't need to do the mural. I don't need to have the problems or, you know, that sort of thing. That's okay.
I'm not. But
well, we have to decide whether we're going to do it or not. You know, that's all. Yeah. And your most recent comment was, let's not do it. Let's move on to something else.
I'm going to mute myself for a minute and see what the rest of the group has to say.
Okay. So to try to I'm going to put words in your mouth, Bob. But I think
that's all right.
Agree with him. The point of the questions is not to relitigate in the sense that people haven't already answered those questions. And to that end, like the reason why these questions is specifically because we have at some level kind of answered them, but what we haven't done is exactly answered them in the form that these specific questions prompt us to do. And that focus is what is valuable in terms of allowing us to create a distillation of all of those near conversations, those near discussions that we have done for the last 9 to 10 months. That the value that actually comes from those questions is that they are very relevant to everything else that we've talked about. And so by using those as a method for drawing out some statements that are actually very well trodden already, we have the ability to pretty seamlessly take those from our mouths and our chat logs and put them onto paper, such that we can create a mural. And for one, my apologies, Bob. I didn't go into those questions too. So I hope that was a fair characterization. I'm pretty confident it was.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, that was very good, and you're welcome to take words out of my mouth anytime you want to. And yes, these are questions that from another framework, are curatorial questions. Do we have a list of these? Do we have a list of these, even rough answers to these, little descriptions? I'm not talking about essays. I'm talking about little paragraphs that might describe, here's one major problem that I have in working with, intellectual stuff that I think, that I'm trying to solve, and maybe in virtual reality, it will help. What's the description? Give me 3 or 4 sentences of that. What is it? Because that's what I begin to see as how I began to put together what a mural would look like. Because then, of course, the next step is, well, okay, we've got all these descriptions of problems, little chunks of them, little snippets or whatever you want to call them, but a curated list, which the group would put together, and we all look at the list together. It is a list, and there it is, and we say, okay, now we have and I say, well, I can, the lists of problems and some of their interrelationships are something I can express on a mural. Might not be exactly the way you might express it in, you know, diagrammatically or some other way, but, you know, I'll offer one, or you can offer one. We can all offer our own.
I can,
yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. And great conversation there. So I'll make an attempt at summarizing my interest in, or an attempt to answer the questions, because actually it has nothing to do with VR or text. All right. In that the reason I'm interested in VR and text is because it may be a promised land to help resolve some conflicts that we have today. The conflicts that I see that we have today are sort of over deterministic words and causations that occur in it, like when we think that we're talking about knowledge and this sort of a objective truth of things and how cause and effect are related. And the more you dig in, you find out that it's way more complicated than that. Polanyi speaks about this all the time, the tacit dimension, the idea of even if you want to be as objective as possible, you still are adding in all of this relativity to the scenario, right? So when I think of the meeting point of the nexus of text and VR, I don't have an image of what it should be, just that if these two things, these two affordances, one that's very old and one that's very new, meet, will it help with our personal knowledge, resolving our personal knowledge and our own personal, how we relate concepts and the idea of having partial knowledge, never complete knowledge? Will it help then to help ourselves think, and then to help us communicate more clearly with others? Perfect example, and honestly, my confidence level is very low that it actually will help, but I think it's valuable to bring out these problems anyway. An example of this would be even in just this conversation, saying that the questions have been answered in the past reminds me of my job, where there's all sorts of documentation for how the tools that I'm supposed to talk about at a technical level, how they work. But it is all hyperbolic. It is all like, it doesn't provide you the counterfactuals, you know, like, how is this different than that? When does this particular thing fail, right? So even though there's tons of documentation, it's still somehow not sufficient, right? So I'm interested in saying that here are a list of frictions that we experience today. And maybe somewhere between a very nuanced and more mature AI plus VR as a realm to explore, plus the tried and true text, we can hopefully not make things worse.
That's a wonderful metaphor. Thank you. The frictions metaphor. And I agree. You know, my larger, one of my larger missions in life these days is, how do we improve human thinking in the face of the catastrophic futures that we have in front of us? And I'm hopeful that potentially a creative group like this could, through struggling with VR and information murals and ontologies and epistemologies and all of that, and but addressing, you know, my questions, as your metaphor wonderfully captures, is, you know, what frictions are we trying to deal with to begin with? You know, can we get a list of them, a list that we all have? And please, not one in chat. You know, I can't pay attention to chat and pay attention to you at the same time.
Yeah, I would be interested in listing out those frictions. I have listed out them in different ways before, so I can certainly add that to the mix. Not in chat though.
Thank you. Anybody else have a reaction to what we've just, you know, Alan and Brondel and I've been saying?
Bob, I've got a few few thoughts, and I'll try not to sort of go over what's already been raised. One of the things I was thinking, I was sort of listening to all this, is that a lot of recent discussion, in a sense, has been unwittingly around the second question. Because in our discussion of whether we might take the 2050 mural or the Narrows mural, do something with it, one of the things I'm sort of noticing is in a very both and sense rather than either or sense, some very, very different perspectives between one that effectively is analytically driven, that conceptualizes and then goes and builds, and one that starts with a visual and works back to, we'll fill in the blank, you know, and I said both and, they very much map over to the range of human approaches to things. And that in itself is interesting, because that diversity is something our tools and our approaches will need to address. So there's a friction for you, and it's a subtle one, but and tends to come out as disagreements about something else, but the real disagreement is just about the perspective issue. So that's something we need to. Anyway, I'll stop at that point, but that's one more for the pot.
Can I ask you to write that one up in a short paragraph?
I can send it to you in an email, Bob.
All right, send it to everybody.
Yeah, no, I will do. But no, conscious of your point about chat, I will make sure it's memorialized so you can get it. Absolutely.
Well, it is because if we're trying to be cumulative here, put things to synthesize things, we have to have some place of putting a record together. And if somebody's got to be able to do that. Somebody's got to have the list, curate the list.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I alluded to before people came on was I realized after a long time, for instance, I've been looking at issues to abstract information from your murals. And I realized I was barking up the wrong tree completely, because although all that work done is interesting, it really boils down to the fact that our tools aren't up to snuff. So how they fail is almost immaterial. And yes, I can sort of write that down, but that's not the pressing problem at the moment. The key point was to get to the thing that actually the real problem is the tools aren't coping. So how they're failing is interesting. And again, I'm in the process of writing up, but that now becomes a slow-term task. Brandel.
Okay, Brandel.
So what are the major problems we are trying to solve by putting text in VR? I find that text is a technology that we use to the hilt in terms of when we had, you read Fisher and the history of text, the history of various developments, and you realize that small changes in the medium, the substrate that writing occurs on, had enormous changes in our cognitive capabilities. But I think that, and I'm not going to say that evolution has stopped. I think a lot of people claim that, and it's just because they've been alive for this part, and it seems like it's been going slowly. So it's not that it's stopped, it's that it needs people like us to help push those evolutions. And what we need to do is really consider the medium that we have available, the sort of the working components of the digital interactive systems that Engelbart and others were able to put together, and the practical consequences for what information reading and writing need to be in this new medium. Virtual reality is the current least worst sort of understanding or representation of what an intrinsically digital medium is. I don't anticipate in the coming decades that we'll need to stick stuff to our faces. I think that's like, and any overemphasis on that, what's happening in the next few years, notwithstanding, is a cul-de-sac. What's important is digitalness, and what that means we can do with information. Because as you know, Bob, when you put together a document, it's fixed. You can read it in different ways, but what you do, what it is you're reading has to remain totally fixed. And there's an incredible opportunity, but there's an incredible danger in having an interactive medium that has the ability to be relevant for just you, or have different views for different people looking at the same thing at the same time. We have so little literacy in what the practical consequence of making those tweaks are. that it's essential that we think broadly about what those differences are and what the current status quo of text is doing for us in all of those different ways, in order to make sure that we have a broad enough set of contextual details to make assessments about what are worthwhile experiments to have going into the future. So that's hopefully what are the major problems we are trying to solve by putting text in VR.
Yeah, Brandel.
I think that's,
Brandel is what I've focused and what the murals focused on, and what I've worked on mainly is what in technological terms often called the human-computer interface. That is, how do we display information to poor old human beings who don't have the anywhere near the capability digitally as computers do. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing that every day with the DeepMind and other kinds of results. In terms of murals, for example, the DALL-E drawing software makes me rethink the whole way I would make icons and what I call VLICons, visual language icons. Maybe, but it certainly is a direction that if we pushed it, if we nudged it a little bit, I wouldn't have so much problem of taking huge amounts of time to make images for certain kinds of murals, because I think DALL-E would create apparently 6 or 8 or 10 of them for me right off that I could choose from. And so, boy, that would speed up my process a lot and reduce my budget.
So Bob, are you asking these questions for a general discussion, or are you asking these questions with the concern of maybe making a mural around making a mural in VR?
Well, that's what I was asking. That's why I replied with the question. Yes. Yeah, because I do, as I've said several times, I do not assume that, and I would hope that the rest of you wouldn't, at least for me, with me and my involvement, assume that I would start with a glossary. I would start with a set of questions that are problems. What are the problems? In fact, what are the big problems that we're focused on? And then do we have any kind of curation that we can start with that I can, and I'm not going to do all this work, but hey, a lot of people need to be involved in writing the descriptions of these problems. I can't write them all.
Okay, so with that basic understanding, first of all, just to make sure we don't misunderstand each other, this is not a glossary. Just to make that really clear, okay? There's absolutely no reason why a question couldn't be written there. So I don't understand the kind of anger at the fact that there is a layout space, but that's one thing. And then a question, and this is meant to be a kind, not a passive-aggressive question. Have you or anyone else read the introduction as we've had it for the last couple of weeks for the book? I'm not even sure if I shared it with you. Okay. So one of the key things in there is the corollary to what Brandel was talking about. I really believe that if we're going to make magic that is useful in VR, the thing that'll have to be revolutionized is metadata. And that will in turn allow us to do things with other text. And I also agree with Brandel that this whole strapping things to your eyes is going to be revolutionary for a while, but in a decade or so, you probably won't need it. I completely agree with that. So what the data pieces are is crucial. And that is the reason why I think it is so important for us to play with things like this, with being able to move stuff about, and that these stuff that we move about, they have some knowledge of how they are connected to other stuffs. And yes, of course, this is not new. Of course, these questions have been asked for decades, no question. That I thought this was the first thing I was going to do when I did my PhD. But then Mark Anderson told me that, no, there's no such thing as references. Everybody has to make it from scratch. That's the underlying metadata. It doesn't exist. So that, right, you can't just cite things. The stuff that you did for your thesis, Mark, right? With that database.
You're selling us metadata again, and we all agree. As far as I know, we all agree.
I'm not selling.
I certainly agree.
I'm not selling you metadata. I don't think you need to be sold on metadata. What I am saying is that you and Mark just now were talking about there isn't great tools for having these kinds of conversations, right? And I'm not talking about just the metadata. I'm talking about where, Bob, the questions that you ask now, which are entirely reasonable questions for making a structure like this, where would you like us to put them? Would you like us to share a Google Doc? Should we put in something like this, or Illustrator, or email? That is probably the first thing that needs to be addressed.
Any one of the above will do.
Alan.
I can't manage all this information myself. And all of us, I think, are devoting only parts of our time to this project, if it is indeed a project.
What do you mean, if it is indeed a project? What aspect are you talking about?
What I mean is that a project, usually for me anyway, says we're going to address, it has been proposed that we address these 3 questions for the next X numbers of sessions, or only for one session. I don't, and is everybody now, will everybody please indicate affirmatively if you agree, or say no, you don't want to do that. I want to hear that that's what the plan is.
Agree to what, Bob? Let's make sure we don't misunderstand each other.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm asking you. What do you feel?
There's a general assumption, which I've partially contributed to, which is that these are the questions that I've outlined are interesting questions in this group, or I wouldn't be attending the group all the time. Yes, I could conceive of potentially making a useful information mural that has curated group descriptions of the answers, the current answers now, the rough answers now of that we have to those questions. And then the next step is, will people help creating the descriptions of these major problems, the first drafts of these descriptions? Then I have something to work with.
So, Bob, just, not to be annoying, I really don't know how not to be annoying on this, but have we been spending the last 1 hour and 40 minutes on a disagreement of whether something like this can have a question in it? Because, like the Hangout.
I don't think that's what's going on. From anything that's happening is
okay.
This speaks to how we are coming from the people speaking are coming from totally different frames of reference, and we're talking past each other.
My frame of reference is that if Bob wants to do a mural, I think that would be useful.
I'm willing to do a mural. I don't necessarily want to unless there is an agreement about what we are going to do, and if that's the focus.
But at the same time, I am working on just getting people's information down so we can have this kind of a map. And I hope we can take this into maybe VR for the day, maybe not, probably not, considering today. But yeah.
Well, let's do that. All right. I'm withdrawing that.
Good.
Let's do your project. Whatever it is. Let's do yours.
That's
a little unfair. Do your project,
but
whatever it is.
I think it's a good idea if Bob doesn't do the mural right now, because in other domains, the problem is more understood. The problems can be formulated. We're not there yet, and that's okay. So I don't think it's the place to put together a mural yet. That's just my opinion.
Right. No, that's fine, Alan. But seriously, guys, what are we actually doing here? There's two work products that are going to come out of this. One, the recordings of the symposium. That is a work product. It'll be on YouTube. And the second work product is the book. It will be in there. Everything will be transcribed. I had a hope that we could somehow augment the experience for those people who are choosing to access this information. And I thought we had, over the last few weeks, discussed that there are several ways to do that. And I think a mural of this knowledge space would be really valuable. And I hope that some of the underlying information could also work in like a network diagram or on a timeline. So I really thought we were talking about complementary approaches. What I want to do is give Brandel a data set, like you saw today, in a nice form, and say, Brandel, with the stuff you already have, could you somehow put it somewhere and see if he gets inspired? And then do the same thing with Fabien. Those would be fun things to do. And the way that I see a mural, Bob, so that you don't think maybe I misunderstood or maybe I have, it is many things. On a surface, simple level, it's lots of information boxes on a background. But of course, the reality behind it is the deep process of finding out what should be in those boxes, how they relate. I understand it's a really deep process that I think we should look over time to how to support. And I do think you are asking questions about, okay, we do this in VR or even just normally digital, what's the benefit? And I think that is something we're trying to do by experimenting. You know, the reason that I've been doing a lot of this work is because of Mark's analysis of your mural. I'm thinking, that's an issue. Can I simplify? Can I simplify? I'm going in this direction, you're going in that direction in terms of approach. I think that is a useful dialogue. So that's why I think it's a little unfair when you say, do my project or your project. I actually think it's aspects of the same, not entirely at all, but I do think they can talk to each other.
My sense is that there's the disconnect is that we're finding out that what goes into what are the foundational sort of premises of a mural are much more opinionated, that they are that they are specific to driving toward a specific goal, and that there's a discovery process which sort of comes before the process of putting a lot of things out there, because it's about people and their orientations and their viewpoints. And so I agree that at a sort of motivational level, both what you're discussing and putting forward and what Bob is talking about are motivated by the same sort of sources. But what it I think is showing is that the more general sort of covering the ground is something that, as far as Bob has explored with the process of creating murals, isn't possible to create a meaningful representation of within the context of a mural. And that in the same way that the Nirex mural is like, what happens, like, what are we going to do with all of this waste? You know, like, there's a really specific sort of call to action that underpins the entire thing that it's in support of. And so a general covering of the ground isn't something that the muralification, if I can reduce it to that word, can actually do. And that's where the disconnect is that it needs to be more opinionated and intentional as an artifact. And so if it's just about like what we do, then we can't. It's what we should do. And that will incidentally cover a lot of the same ground, but it's a different point of view that has an essential tweak on what it is that we're going to end up producing. Is that a fair characterization from both of you?
Yep.
Awesome.
I think that's why I was banging on earlier today about limited data sets and also the authorial side of a mural. I think you hit it bang on, and I think the fact that it's difficult to set questions now, but we can maybe set the questions differently. And one thing that has been really annoying, I sent everybody who was invited to the symposium as a presenter, who is a presenter, a list of questions for a bio and I showed a video of this kind of stuff, I've gotten 2 bios back and they're just normal crap bios that I have to deal with. So I'm wondering now, based on many things, including the very first question today, how do we treat people, institution, the category, including that kind of thinking. And if the result of this thing is going to go both in a mural potentially and in a kind of a graph potentially as raw material, should we maybe send an email questionnaire to everyone and ask them, hang on, Bob, please. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that ideally, maybe when you're working on a proper mural with your system, you shouldn't just have pen and paper virtually. You should have some kind of data stuff. So if you want to choose to put Alan Laidlaw's perspective in, you have a bit of Alan there. But please, just for a moment, let me, in Bob's jokingly language, my world and my project, okay, for the book itself, should we maybe ask everyone a series of questions? Are you interested in VR, yes or no? Right, so at least we get the basic connections, because I don't want to put perspectives into people's. If we have that, can we encode it, and is that useful later on as part of a mural, or is it only useful as a kind of a people map over?
Can I jump in on the end thing? I think that's a really interesting thing in terms of asking people, are you interested? The difficulty is that question unintentionally is quite hard-edged, because what we're really fishing for is not, do you think, because it's not a case of does it, there may be a few people who think VR is rubbish. I very much doubt it. The question is it something in the reasonably short term that's going to have massive change? Because I think that's that's really what's being fished for. Is it, yes, I know what it is and I'm tracking it, but I don't really see how it has an impact on me, as opposed to thinking, goodness gracious, actually this is happening now and it's probably already happened and I'm maybe already behind the curve. And I think that's the graduation perhaps you're looking for. Is that fair to say, Fred?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, Mark, for once, I think it is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something as simple as the first book. Hang on, it's actually a copy here. Right, you've mostly either seen or you have a version of the first book, right? It's so big, it's almost unreadable.
It is unreadable to a large extent, yes.
And so is 2.
Thanks for your votes of support there, but no, but hang on. Let me address that. So, what have I done to make it readable? I built a piece of software called Reader. That, right? Of course, it uses visual meta, but what it does, it allows you to change views and jump around in the document quicker than you can with any other software. I'm trying to address these specific things. If you come across the term VR in book 1, which really didn't care about that, select VR, do Command F, you'll see all the lines in the book that talk about it, including the headings above. So you would instantly know what person has discussed it. That is one, it's a tiny software function, but the point of it is that with a single click, you can know what other people are discussing the same topic. There was a lot of back and forth dialogue. Oh, we should do more. We should do like a software version of the book, all these things. So what I'm saying now that we have this notion of VR, now that we have this notion of a mural, can we squeeze these participants to be a bit more explicit about their interests and relationships, such as if someone else was inspired by Bob Horn or Ted Nelson, if they say that maybe you can use it in mural, maybe not. Maybe we can use it in a kind of relationship thing, but they are at least bits of knowledge about our contributors that'll help people go through the book.
My impression is that, I have not tried to read either volume from the standpoint of somebody has identified all the key concepts in there,
right?
And for me, they are usually not concepts that can be identified by a single word.
Yes,
as you know, and we agree. I think you and I agree on that. What I want when I see a big fat book like that, I want some curation in it. I want this. I want summaries. I want things that make sense to me.
Right.
Anyway,
Okay.
I'd like to hear from Alan. Really like to hear from Alan. He's been waiting for a while here.
I'm happy to
appreciate
wait. I'm happy to hear from Alan too, but just two things quickly. Number one, I only have 9 minutes left. We're going to hear from King for the first time ever. I want to be there. Secondly, in terms of curation, in terms of editorial, Mark and I are working on that, but I'm really worried about putting perspectives in people's mouths. That's why I want to have more specific things for them. Okay, Alan.
Okay, thanks. I'll try and encapsulate a couple of things. One of the major tensions or frictions that I see has been played out here like a passion play, right? And so it's kind of fantastic, right? We can draw from it. There's two perspectives I see going on. One is a belief in top-down thinking that allows for greater summarization and saying this is what's important, this is what a group is saying, here's what's like I believe Karl Popper's idea of a hypothesis needs to be that it actually contains surprising information, novel data, right? Otherwise it's nothing, right? So that's one approach. That's how science is done a lot of times. Then there's this big data approach that is almost like, hey, let's get everybody's take and provide better tools, and then things can sort of pop up in a way that you wouldn't necessarily see through a highly structured, regimented format. That is a great, in my example, in my thinking, that is a great friction to dive into, because I'm personally more interested in problem framing than saying, here's exactly how the future is going to look. Because, and if I can share my screen for a moment, to me, the future, this, if you can see this, hopefully it won't give you any bad effects. This looks like hippy dippy trippy stuff, but I watched this and to me it's mesmerizing, because this is how I think, meaning that each of these are different kinds of thoughts that are merging into one another. This goes back to the Dali mentioned earlier. This is also a lot, to me, how social media feels. And why I bring this up in conjunction with social media is that even though we can sketch out things like Alan Kay and Doug Engelbart can sketch out, Vannevar Bush can sketch out like an internet or a way of distributed global brain, we can't foresee things like how weird social media actually feels and what it does to our thinking and what it has done. And so a lot of times, and we see this in any kind of paradigm shift, especially when it comes to things that intersect with thinking, the modern way, the newer way, is completely unimagined ahead of time, right? So getting caught up in how that's going to look is less compelling to me, because I feel like it's chasing some sense of artificial certainty than coming to an agreement on, hey, these are actual struggles that I think could be improved in X or Y way. That's it.
Awesome. So in answer to your question, Rhoda, about asking people about whether they, like VR, yes or no, my sense is that we don't know enough about the shape of the thing that we would want to convey to have confidence that asking those questions gives that stuff to us at this instant. I'm not worried about that, because as you know, I make lots of small things. You've made one or two big things in the form of author and reader, and so the process obviously has to be different from there. But what I do with producing small things is I approach whether the closure over the concept is correct or not with a degree of equanimity. That's like, well, I'll try. I'll see what it looks like, And so my natural orientation is to go like, I don't know how much preparation we can do. So let's see what we got and then roll the dice, essentially. Right. And so those may be useful. And the other aspect of it is, as I was sort of getting to with, when we were talking about with author and reader, is what are the costs of doing so and what are the benefits of doing so? And so if you feel like you can do that essentially for free, then yeah, sure, go at it. But I don't know that we have a clearer sense of the value that we get out of that at this moment.
Okay.
To the end that that's not to put the suggestion down, but just like, I don't know. I mean, if you want, and then we can. But yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry for being a bit rushy. Got to go, but I want to support what Bob is doing. I want to be an active part of that, but I think it is separate from this, though hopefully some of the pieces can speak to each other. What I'm trying to do with a big volume of work, if someone knows Scott Ratbag and they know that he is interested in electronic literature, right? And who is Jaron Lanier? Oh, VR, and he's from America. Maybe they have something in common because Scott's American, Norwegian, whatever, right? So in here, where it's just text, there's no graph, you see electronic literature is bold. You all know this. Click on electronic literature, and you get the entry for that. So this is not only for VR. This is about helping people see the relationships. We in our community, we know who Ted and Doug are. We have many ideas about Bob Horn and Bob Stein. But to help people come in and say, oh, there is a certain connection. Maybe there's a sentence that says, like for Mark and me, we went to the same university at the same time, that kind of stuff. I'm talking basic stuff. If Bob wants to use some of it in a mural, that'd be great. But I'm not at all saying, Bob, here's a phone book, turn it into a mural. Bob, any final comments or thoughts from you?
I have no real strong comments at this point. I think I've offered what I've offered, and one has to, and in those kind of offerings, unless there's a a bunch of people who say, yeah, that's what we're involved in and that's what we want to do now, or we'll want to do that later, that's fine. Either way, that's that's where I come down.
Bob, could you maybe then email the group what your offering involves, what you would like us to do? Because then we could start putting some effort into it. When you emailed the question, I believed I had answered it. Clearly you didn't feel that way, which is fine. So if you say, look, here's an email, here's 5 questions, please write a paragraph each and send it back to you. I think that is fair enough for you to do. I don't think anything here needs to stop anything else, and just see how it goes. Is that fair enough?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got to go.
Rhoda,
yes.
Rhoda, let me add one short comment.
Okay.
I did a calculation a few minutes ago, estimating that some 60,000 man hours probably went into the 2050 Pathways graphic. I've not confirmed that with Bob, but it's based on some conservative assumptions.
Right.
It seems to me that with less than 2 weeks to go, thinking of doing a mural is damn near impossible. It would be difficult.
I gotta go. I gotta go.
2023.
I understand.
So,
we can't do it to a level of that, but I really need to be here for this. I'm going to leave it running so you guys can continue the conversation. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I've got nothing else to say. I agree, Mark.
I'll just say before I go, I like the idea of approaching the problem formations and frictions as a way to eventually get to a visualization of those and showing how they can overlap, and maybe there's a solution in there. But I think that we're like what I was trying to say earlier is like I don't even know that we're there yet, right? So there's still some like groundwork in what the group is about and the problem it's trying to solve. And I think that we're coming at it from different angles, right? Like I've got no, as much as I like Future of Tech Symposium, I've got no stake in it. That's not why I'm here, right? I'm here because the interesting topics get brought up, and I'd like it to lead to something. I would like to build something from that. But so anyway, that's all I got.
Alan, is it possible that you and I could spend an hour together sometime on Zoom? just to get acquainted?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm interested in some of the topics that you addressed, and just to see where you're going with some of those things are important to me. But it would be different than trying to weave them into this group, I think.
I would be honored. That would be great. There's certain things that I've struggled with for a long time that I can't figure out how to visualize, but I know that they're related. So
well, all right. Send me an email, hornbob@earthlink.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Right.
Take care, Peter.
Hey, everybody.
It'll be on a round robin.
Okay.
Robin email.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Brandel, thanks for putting words in my mouth.
Hopefully they were okay.
They were fine. They tasted good.
Bob, a quick one
right,
for you.
Yeah, I've got time.
I've got a question for you both, just to sort of save me. It's sending an email that you'll then have to feel obliged to reply to. So as quickly, well, the quickest one is for Brandel, so I'll do it quickly. One of the things I realized when I was looking at all the stuff about mapping things is that I really don't get the relationship between SVG and pixels. I think it's a historical thing to do with the fact that AI has a draft board. So literally, it stems from the age of print. And that, because a vector diagram has no size. Things are relative sizes to one another. But so I think when I was trying to put things, from PDF to SVG, it kept asking me about resolution. I'm thinking, it doesn't matter. I'm not, but anyway, so I might send you a short email just to, with a couple of my probably misunderstandings of things, which your expertise might be able to correct me on. Because I'm also unclear as to what a pixel is in 3D.
Yep.
How you address it.
Definitely no pixels in 3D. There are positions. One place where Illustrator and other applications kind of munch things is that often they will quantize the numerical resolution of specific fields. And so in that sense, you end up being limited. That's not a feature of SVG as much as it is a feature of some of the assumptions that people have made about what SVG is for. As well as concessions to things like file size, because
and I mean, I don't approach any of these things from a sort of glass half empty thing. I'm just, I suppose my approach is a pragmatist. I think that this is a hard edge around which I must navigate or break myself upon. It doesn't really matter which, but you choose your battles carefully. And in terms of doing things in the now, most of these things are restrictions we can't work around. So I'll try and distill that into a few questions you might be able to. Either it's just say, go read this, to something I would never find. And the other thing quickly to Bob is that I've rather stopped. Well, I'm still thinking a lot about your murals because I happen to use those for the distillation of some of the problems. I'm very happy in the sort of slow term, thinking less about the imminent event, but if you're still interested in the potential of even just taking one of the smaller things as a proof of concept to see how it feeds back to say your work practice. So I was less about here we've made this in this thing, but just actually look, I took something I made 10 years ago and we can actually get this much out of it in a new thing. Or else, if it just says, right, in order to do this going forward, I actually need to rethink some of my design process, which is, I think, one of the things that may come out of it. So I'm very happy to help if I can. My limited skills, such as they are mainly to do with munging data. So in that sense, that's probably where I can help. So I'm still looking at these things, but I just
in terms of the text part of murals, it is why I use in Illustrator, because I can change the text. So let's say a requirement, a requirement for text in virtual reality or any other thing is that I or other people have got to be able to change it. We got to be able to edit it. We're never, we're rarely, if ever, perfect in our first drafts.
Sure.
So, and SVG as far as pixelization doesn't work in that. You know, you just can't do it. You got to do something else. I don't know. I haven't any idea what, but except that I've got to be able to do it.
I suppose where I'm coming from is if I sat down today, say, right, I'm going to produce a really rich vector artwork image because I know I want to take it into VR and I want to do all kind of funky interactions with it. That immediately says to me, I'm going to want to put all sorts of sort of effectively hidden secret sauce in, only part of which is an image map, not perhaps as we think of them in strict web terms, sort of a way of saying this part of this picture has a special meaning. And exactly what that special meaning is, something, you know, rabbit hole, I won't go down now. And I think you can sort of do it with tools at the moment, but I think it's hard. And also if you're doing a creating or indeed a synthesizing process, but you're using a tool like Illustrator, that's also kind of hard to have that rather hard-edged, data-y feeling perspective on it when you're just trying to make something that's comprehensible to the human eye. And because one of the things I thought I wouldn't, because it might just fan the flames in our discussion earlier, is one of our problems with metadata was we're far better at imagining what we might do with it than actually even completing the empty metadata, all those empty boxes we have in all those things around us, because the reality is that's what makes it happen. So we can imagine what, and this is what, you know, again, one of the things that sits right across the questions you answered, and where I was saying I think the tools are failing us. Not by any fault of the people who made them. The world changes, and something we've missed coming is a deeper interrelation between what we thought of as broadly visual objects and things that have more interactive element. And I think the same problem is runs through, for instance, the infographic community, or the data, the people who like to do data display. It's because one of the things that I'm constantly being reminded by is when you see one of those marvelous sort of graphs of colored blobs and lines, you know, some social network graph things. The dirty secret seems to be nearly all of those have been human created. Someone did not just take a screen grab of it when the music stopped. No, and certainly, I know this myself. Some of the images I used in my thesis, I absolutely, because the algorithms just aren't clever enough to, on top of all the other work they have to do to make something that actually looks pleasing to the eye. You know, there's an element of overlap. You know, it's all these gray areas where some overlap goes from being obvious overlap to being, I can't make sense of this. And all these sort of nuances that just leap out the moment we go from the static static view, which is not a bad thing of itself, to a dynamic view. Because of course, when you have the static view, you absolutely, as a single creator of it or part of a team, you absolutely have control that when you get to the end, the picture, for want of a better word, you created can't be messed around with. And that's not trying to stop people doing it. So saying, no, if I've done this and I've done it correctly, what I intended to show will be seen by the person looking at it. And we're now upending that notion of saying, right, that's great. That's our starting plate. Now, the exact thing we want to do is we want to take that, turn it, and change it every which way. How? For all sorts of perfectly good reasons. But it implies to me a lot more back of curtain stuff than I certainly had imagined when I started looking at this.
Well, one of the most useful things that has happened for me in the last 3 or 4 sessions that we've had was Brandel's reminder that of the layers in Illustrator, which I've just never used. I think I mentioned that I learned to draw with MechDraw that didn't have them, and I just got very good at you know, because I did a whole book in MechDraw and a whole visual book. So it seems to me that's one way of exploring next. I put down, for example, I put all of the little chunks that were in the form of headlines I collected all of them. I may have sent them to you. And that they would be on one layer, but then I realized that some of those also belong to another layer, to a single row by itself.
Yeah.
So you would need two different kinds of metadata for a single headline.
Well, again, it's really interesting. It just shows how trying to build something you want to have plasticity in many dimensions, produces a few hard-edged problems when doing it in a two-dimensional surface. Sorry, Fred, I should explain. We're not actually talking about 2 weeks' time. This is just talking about some of the things we've learned out of imagining what we might do using Bob's murals, simply in terms of, that's the substrate we had to work with. And actually, it's really useful because there's so much complexity built into it. There's so much information that the scale really that's the one thing I do enjoy about it, is everything. Nothing is trivial when I look at all the tasks I'm looking at. The amount of things that you have to do are quite large. Sorry, Fred, you had your hand up.
No. Don't be sorry. I hashtagged you in the comments what Mark said. Obviously, I missed most of that, but I think it's incredibly relevant what I just watched for our new king. Mark, you can look forward to it. It's a really wonderful speech. But, what is the point of a nation? I'm not going on a tangent here, right? The point of a nation, the nation is an organism. And what is an organism? An organism is something that is defined by the fact that it has organs. It's a self-referential definition, right? An organism is something with organs. Well, how is that relevant here? The thing you talked about at the end, I think, is such an important thing, whether there should be flexibility or authorial voice. And of course, I think in our community, we agree that the balance should be shared and it should be clear, right? Prince Charles, now King Charles, what is his job? It's almost nothing. But at the same time, his job is to hold together the United Kingdom.
I have to go. I'm sorry. I can't. I have to go. This was a good session.
Bob.
All right, Bob. Bye, Bob.
Well, yeah, I'm going to drop. I should go into work. But
yeah. Anyway, I'll let you go. I got to go too. We're way over. All I was saying is that I'm sure Bob will watch this. It's frustrating sometimes having the arguments with Bob because, yes, it's an authored thing and it's static and that's good. And then we're also saying we should be able to do this with it. And then he gets a bit upset because of the process, which I understand, right? But there are so many ways for us to look at this now, as in the question of what is the shape of the author, right? That's my final bit for today.
And I don't know what the emoji for is. Well, I'll email you. That's fine for phone. I don't know what it is, but I'll send you an email, Brandon, on which I promise I will try and keep short, but where you might be able to point me to points where I don't understand things.
Also, really important for those of you coming up to the Future of Text, both of you. Unfortunately, on the first day, I cannot join you for dinner because I'm hosting Vint and Sigrid, and they can't eat anywhere loud. So that's going to be at home. So it's not me trying to be important a la Wendy Hall, who would like to sneak off at whoever's important. It isn't. So on the next day, we're organizing a dinner. Fortunately, it'll be self-pay kind of a thing because we only have sponsorship for the lunch. But on the first day, we should probably try to organize a dinner nearby for those who can attend anyway, right? To keep the group together.
Yeah,
that would be good.
Okay, we'll look into it. All right, bye guys.
And
thank you for surviving.
Mark,
I'm actually meeting with the authors of SVG this afternoon. They work at Apple, so it's funny. It's funny to be talking about it in this context.
I shall add it to my burgeoning to-do list. Okay, take care. Yeah, bye.
Everybody.